Okay, let's paint a picture. Imagine this. It's 8:30 p.m. You're, let's call him John, hunched over a cluttered desk, maybe in a small London flat.
Right, that familiar late night work glow.
Exactly. The monitor glow, tired shadows on the face. And his fingers are just hovering over the keyboard, but they just won't move.
Stuck.
Yeah, stuck. That email from his boss is just glaring back, demanding a revised draft by morning. There's that tightness in the chest, that familiar unwelcome grip.
The anxiety kicking in.
Totally. Then the phone buzzes, relentless vibration against the desk, another message, maybe the group chat, another social thing, just another item added to an overflowing plate.
Always more piling on.
Right. And so for maybe the third night this week, he finds himself canceling plans. Just a quiet sigh.
The sorry can't make it text.
Yeah. Just one more draft, he murmurs. That mantra, endless striving. But what if John's real problem isn't just, well, a lack of time? What if it's something, I don't know, more insidious, something deeper that's really got him captive?
Like what?
What if it's the sheer burden of caring too much? Too much about approval, maybe. Too much about hitting some impossible standard of perfection. Too much about countless things that, when you really boil it down, just don't truly matter. That feeling, being perpetually overwhelmed, constantly chasing some elusive state of being enough. It's incredibly familiar, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It resonates with so many people.
It really begs a central question, and that's what we're diving into today. What if true freedom isn't about finding more hours in the day or exerting more control over everything out there?
Right.
What if it's about a kind of profound liberation from unnecessary worry? Now, we're not talking about apathy here.
Important distinction.
Yeah, not some kind of reckless disregard for everything.
Yeah.
No, we're talking about something much more strategic, actually, more intentional. Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we unpack ideas that might genuinely reshape how you navigate, well, the complexities of modern life. And today, we're exploring a, I think, surprisingly radical and incredibly insightful idea from a 16th century philosopher, Michel de Montaigne.
Going way.
We are. We're going to examine how life can feel dramatically lighter, maybe more in control, and definitely more joyful when you learn how to strategically, quite deliberately, just stop caring about certain things.
Selectively stop caring.
Selectively, exactly. Our mission today is to equip you, the listener, with a toolkit. Practical wisdom, inspired by Montaigne's timeless thinking, designed to loosen that iron grip of unnecessary worry.
Okay.
And help you redirect that precious mental, that emotional energy toward what genuinely matters to you. So get ready, because by the end of this deep dive, you might just find yourself breathing a little easier and seeing your daily burdens through a profoundly different lens.
It's a really compelling starting point because, as you said, John's dilemma, it's not an isolated incident at all. It feels like a modern epidemic, doesn't it?
It really does.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is the irony, the sheer irony embedded in this state of overcaring.
How so?
Well, we operate under this deeply ingrained belief, right? That by caring more, by striving harder, trying to control every variable, every outcome, we'll somehow get better results or more security, maybe happiness.
That's the assumption, yeah.
But the paradox is stark. The more we attempt to exert this kind of, exhaustive, microscopic control over every single outcome, the more suffering we actually inflict on ourselves.
We cause our own pain.
In a way, yes. We become the architects of our own anxiety, meticulously building these mental prisons of what-ifs and should-haves and if-onlys.
It feels like we're constantly on high alert then, doesn't it? Like every single detail is a potential landmine waiting to go off. What's the real psychological toll of that constant striving, that vigilance?
Precisely. The psychological impact is profound. It's far-reaching. It shows up as chronic stress, which, doesn't just feel bad. It literally changes our brain chemistry.
Really? How?
Yeah, it impacts our prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain responsible for rational decision-making, planning, impulse control.
The executive function center.
Exactly. And this leads to what many people experience as decision paralysis, not because there aren't options, but because our mental resources are just drained by those endless internal what-if loops.
Makes sense.
So even simple choices start to feel overwhelming. We also see pervasive burnout, this deep sense of inadequacy, even in people who are, objectively speaking, successful.
Right.
And ultimately, it leads to a loss of the very peace and genuine control over our internal state that we were desperately trying to achieve in the first place.
So it's completely self-defeating.
A classic self-defeating cycle. The pursuit of perfect control leads directly to a loss of inner peace.
And it's not just a feeling, is it? The numbers, they absolutely back this up. They show just how deeply this anxiety has, permeated our collective experience.
The data is quite sobering.
We got some truly compelling data that underscores just how widespread this is. It proves that John, and maybe, many of us listening, are far from alone. For instance, a recent 2023 UK study revealed something pretty astonishing. A staggering 67% of adults admitted lying awake at night, replaying conversations.
67%.
Yeah, absolutely consumed by the fear of having said the wrong thing.
Just think about that for a moment. 2 out of 3 adults spending their precious sleep hours dissecting past interactions, agonizing over things they think they might have done wrong.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It is. It speaks to this pervasive fear of judgment, this relentless internal critic that just refuses to shut up, always evaluating, reevaluating every word, every gesture.
And it's not just a UK thing, right?
Oh, not at all. This ties directly into other global trends that illustrate the immense pressure we put on ourselves to be seen as perfect. Look at Australia, for example.
Okay.
Perfectionism burnout. It's not just a buzzword there. It's cited as the #1 reason millennials are actually quitting their jobs.
Wow. That's incredible. So it's not a lack of ambition driving them out.
No.
It's an excess of it, an
Yeah.
unsustainable drive.
Exactly right. This isn't about laziness or a lack of drive. It's about a generation perhaps so relentlessly driven to achieve flawless performance in, well, every aspect of their professional lives that they eventually just hit a wall.
They burn out.
They collapse under the immense, often self-imposed weight of their own standards. So the pursuit of perfection, far from being this clear path to success, actually becomes a direct route to exhaustion and, frankly, profound disillusionment.
Okay. And what about the US? You mentioned trends there too.
Yes, and turning to the US, the data paints an even more maybe alarming picture regarding our social anxieties. Therapy appointments specifically for people-pleasing anxiety, they've apparently tripled since 2020.
Tripled since 2020. That's a staggering rise.
Mm.
What does that tell us about the societal pressures?
Well, it highlights, I think, a deep-seated fear of disappointing others, a compulsive need to seek external validation by constantly trying to accommodate everyone else's needs and desires.
Often at our own expense.
Oh, profoundly at our own expense, our own well-being, our boundaries, our inner peace. This isn't just about being polite, you know?
Right.
It's about a sometimes crippling inability to say no or to prioritize oneself or even risk the slightest hint of disapproval from others.
It makes sense how these stats connect.
They really do. And these statistics, they aren't just abstract numbers on a page. They resonate with so many of us so personally. As you hear these figures, maybe just take a moment to reflect on your own experiences.
Yeah.
Have you found yourself replaying conversations endlessly? Have you felt that suffocating pressure, that need for everything to be perfect, or that urge to please everyone around you?
Chances are you've encountered these feelings.
Chances are, yes, perhaps more often than you'd like to admit. And that's precisely why this deep dive feels so vital right now. It's about acknowledging the problem, maybe naming the trap we fall into, and then, crucially, finding a way out.
It's powerful because sometimes, it takes something really dramatic, a real world event, for us to truly see the absurdity of our own anxieties.
Like a wake-up call.
Exactly. Consider the story of Sarah from Melbourne. Sarah apparently spent years, literally years, agonizing over her LinkedIn profile.
Oh, I think many can relate to that one.
Right. She would meticulously craft every sentence, every bullet point, obsess over skill endorsements, driven by this overwhelming, almost crippling fear of being perceived as anything less than professional.
That pressure to present the perfect image online.
Totally. She'd lose sleep, editing, re-editing, convinced that one misplaced comma or one slightly less than perfect phrase could just derail her entire career.
Wow.
Her identity in many ways got tangled up in this curated online persona, this digital avatar of perfection. She was just convinced everyone, hiring managers, connections, colleagues, would scrutinize it with, microscopic intensity.
And then life delivered a brutal and sudden reframe.
Yeah, her father suffered a severe stroke.
Ooh.
And in that moment, everything just shifted. Those meticulous 3 a.m. editing sessions for LinkedIn, the agonizing over maybe being seen as unprofessional, it all suddenly felt profoundly absurd.
Yeah.
Distant. Irrelevant.
Puts things in perspective very quickly.
Instantly, the immediate pressing reality of her father's health, the fragility of life itself, completely overshadowed every single one of those previous worries. It wasn't just a minor shift. It was a total recalibration of her priorities, forced by circumstances way beyond her control.
Yeah.
And what she realized, what she said so powerfully afterwards, was this: I'd been caring about the wrong audience.
Wow. That cuts deep.
Doesn't it? Right to the core of what we're discussing. She understood her fear, her perfectionism, her anxiety was driven by this perceived external gaze that was ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, just irrelevant when faced with the raw reality of human vulnerability, human connection.
Life-altering events have that power.
They really do, especially those that bring us face to face with mortality or the fragility of loved ones. They have this incredible, almost brutal power. They strip away the trivial, expose the superficial, force us to confront what really matters.
Painful but clarifying.
Incredibly clarifying, yes, sometimes painful. But they reveal the fundamental triviality of concerns that felt overwhelming just moments before. Suddenly, that mountain of perfectionism we were trying to scale, it just shrinks to a molehill. And the vast, beautiful landscape of what truly matters comes into stark, liberating focus. It makes you wonder, though, if it takes such a dramatic event to shake us awake, can we find a perhaps less painful way to cultivate that perspective?
Indeed. And this realization, this profound questioning of what we think we know, what we think matters, well, it brings us directly to Michel de Montaigne himself.
Our 16th century guide.
Exactly. He was grappling with very similar human dilemmas over 450 years ago. That's why his insights have such enduring relevance to our modern problems. He was living in a turbulent time, 16th century France, religious wars, intellectual dogmatism all around.
A lot of certainty being thrown
A
around.
lot of false certainty, perhaps. And Montaigne sought a different kind of certainty, one rooted in humility rather than grand pronouncements. His famous motto, apparently inscribed in the beams of his library tower, was "Que sais-je?"
Which means?
It translates quite simply to, what do I know?
That's a beautiful phrase.
Yeah.
And it sounds, deceptively simple. What do I know? But there's so much depth there, especially for what we're talking about.
It truly does. And this wasn't, it's important to understand, a declaration of ignorance, not an admission of intellectual inadequacy in the usual sense.
Okay.
On the contrary, it was a profound, deeply skeptical inquiry. It was a challenge to the certainty of our worries, a humble yet incredibly powerful question inviting us to dismantle our assumptions about what is actually important.
So he was pushing back against the dogma of his time.
Precisely, pushing back against the prevailing academic and philosophical dogmatism that often claimed absolute truth. He recognized that so much human suffering stems from our absolute certainty about things we don't, or maybe even can't, truly know.
Like what others think of us,
Oh,
or how the future will unfold.
exactly those things. His skepticism wasn't about apathy, it wasn't about giving up, it was about liberation from false certainties.
So when we're lying awake at 3 a.m., agonizing over that email, or replaying that social interaction, Montaigne would effectively lean in and ask us, "Que sais-je?" What do I really know about how this will turn out? How sure am I that this worry is even valid, that this perceived judgment is real, or that this outcome is truly catastrophic?
And crucially, how much do I truly need to know or control about this specific situation right now?
Right. It's about questioning the very foundation of our anxieties.
Precisely. This skeptical inquiry, que sais-je, it serves as the fundamental foundation for questioning the validity and, maybe more importantly, the importance of our anxieties. Okay.
It invites us to pause, to step back, and to evaluate whether our emotional energy is being spent wisely, or if we're just succumbing to these habitual patterns of overthinking and overcaring.
This is the first step.
It's the first crucial step in cultivating what Montaigne championed, intentional detachment. So, we've identified the problem, this modern epidemic of overcaring. We've laid the philosophical groundwork with Montaigne's powerful question. Now, let's actually explore his proactive solutions, his practical, actionable tools for cultivating this vital, truly liberating selective indifference.
Okay, so we've named the trap of overcaring. We've got Montaigne's foundational question, que sais-je. Now let's unpack his really radical idea, selective indifference. And it's absolutely crucial, I think, to clarify right up front when we talk about Montaigne's philosophy of indifference.
Yes, let's be clear.
We are unequivocally not talking about laziness or apathy or some kind of detached, uncaring approach to life.
Not checking out. Not checking out at all. This isn't about becoming a recluse who doesn't care about anything important. Quite the contrary. It is a deliberate, active practice. It's about making a conscious, strategic choice about what not to care about.
Choosing your battles, essentially.
Choosing your battles, exactly. Thereby liberating an enormous, almost unimaginable amount of mental and emotional energy. That energy, which was previously tied up in, trivial anxieties, seeking external validation, playing out hypothetical judgments.
All that noise.
All that noise. It can then be strategically redirected towards what genuinely matters to you. Your true values, your authentic self, your deep relationships, the pursuits that actually nourish your soul.
Freeing up resources for the important stuff.
Precisely. So how do we begin to cultivate this? Montaigne, through his life and his writings, gives us some remarkably actionable tools. Let's dive into the first one. We're calling it the tombstone test.
The tombstone test. It's remarkably simple, but profoundly powerful as a thought experiment. Montaigne implicitly advocated for this kind of perspective through his constant focus on self-knowledge and living well.
Okay.
The core concept is straightforward. When you're faced with a worry that's consuming you, or a weighty decision, or some perceived obligation that feels absolutely suffocating in its urgency, you ask yourself two questions.
What are they?
First, will this specific thing matter in 5 years? And then, to really dial up the perspective, to gain true clarity, will this matter on my deathbed?
Wow, okay. That's direct.
It is direct. It forces you to consider the long term, the ultimate significance of your current worries. It makes you zoom out from the immediate pressure and assess its real impact on the grand tapestry of your life.
Like putting it on a different scale.
Exactly. It's an exercise in temporal perspective.
Yeah.
It strips away the artificial urgency of the moment and reveals what truly endures, what truly holds lasting value for you.
It's a brilliant way, almost brutal maybe, but brilliant, to cut through the noise, isn't it? To instantly see what's just a fleeting concern versus what holds genuine, lasting importance. And we have a great example of this, Mark from Texas. Mark, a project manager, was apparently just consumed by a failed project at work.
A common source of anxiety.
Absolutely. He agonized over every detail, every misstep, every potential criticism. He lost sleep. His appetite suffered. He was irritable with his family, just convinced this one failure would define his whole career. He'd be branded incompetent forever.
The weight of that must have been immense.
Crushing him. So his therapist, sensing how deep this distress was and how maybe self-inflicted the suffering was, gave him a very unusual assignment. Write his own eulogy.
Write his own eulogy. Not something you hear every day.
No, not a resume, not a list of achievements, but a eulogy, as if it were to be read at his funeral, outlining the essence of his life.
And what did Mark realize through doing that?
Well, apparently what he realized was both humorous and profoundly insightful. As he sat there thinking about his life from that ultimate vantage point, he found himself writing about his relationships, his wife, his kids, laughter with friends, kindness to strangers, his impact outside work.
The human stuff.
The human stuff, his love for hiking, his volunteer work. And when he finished, he apparently just felt this profound sense of lightness, almost disbelief. He actually chuckled.
A release.
Yeah. And he told his therapist, turns out nobody mentions quarterly reports.
Ah, that's brilliant.
Isn't it? That realization was just a seismic shift for him. It instantly highlighted the huge, almost comical gap between the fleeting, high-pressure demands of his job and the enduring values that truly defined his life, what would actually be remembered.
Such a powerful recalibration.
Absolutely. This thought experiment is incredibly effective because it helps recalibrate perspective. Makes it abundantly clear what differentiates those immediate, often trivial pressures from our enduring values, the legacy we actually want to leave. It helps you distinguish the urgent, which feels all-consuming,
from the truly important, which is where your authentic life actually resides.
What a powerful, tangible shift for Mark. It sounds like a cold splash of reality, maybe, but ultimately a really refreshing one.
Definitely.
Now, let's move on to the second tool. This is something Montaigne intuitively understood through his own deep self-observation, but modern psychology has now actually put numbers on it. It's the opinion diet.
The opinion diet. Intriguing name.
Yeah. It's a practical, almost diagnostic, week-long exercise. For 7 days, your main task is simply to meticulously track the amount of mental and emotional energy you spend imagining what others are thinking or judging about you.
The imagining part is key.
Totally key. This isn't about what people actually say. Often they say nothing at all. It's about that silent, often debilitating internal monologue, where you play out hypothetical criticisms, anticipate negative reactions, obsessively seek approval in your mind before anyone's even spoken.
And what's truly astonishing here, and something the research explicitly validates, is just how wildly we overestimate this external scrutiny.
We think people are watching us more than they are.
Way more. Studies indicate we overestimate how much others are scrutinizing us, how much they're even noticing us, by a staggering 300%.
300%.
300%. It's often called the spotlight effect in psychology. We mistakenly believe we're the center of attention, that others are scrutinizing our appearance, our actions, our words far more than they actually are.
Wow. So we're spending 3 times the energy worrying.
Pretty much. Think about that mental energy drain. The truth is, most people are far too preoccupied with their own lives, their own worries, their own internal struggles, and their own perceived flaws to dedicate significant mental bandwidth to dissecting our every move.
So the opinion diet isn't just about noticing then, it's about directly challenging that cognitive bias, that spotlight effect.
Exactly. It's an invitation to test this hypothesis for yourself. Just observe for a week. How much mental bandwidth, how much creative energy, how much sheer emotional peace do you reclaim when you consciously try to disengage from this perceived external judgment?
The implication is massive.
Huge. An enormous amount of our mental real estate is occupied by these imagined scenarios of disapproval that often just aren't rooted in reality. It's like having this constant low-grade fever of anxiety, fueled entirely by what we think others are thinking.
And fleeing yourself from that.
It opens up an incredible amount of mental space for genuine thought, for authentic creativity, for deep self-acceptance. It lets you shift from being constantly reactive to external cues to being proactive in defining your own internal landscape.
That's a huge one, especially today in our hyper-connected world where it feels like everyone could be a critic, or at least has the platform.
The pressure is amplified.
Okay, now for the third tool. And this one I feel really gets to the beating heart of Montaigne's spirit, his radical honesty. the good enough rebellion.
I like the sound of that, a rebellion.
Yeah, the core concept here is to actively embrace imperfection, even embrace digression, much like Montaigne's own famous essays, if you've ever read them.
They wander beautifully.
They really do. They are notoriously, wonderfully digressive. He might start a chapter talking about something seemingly trivial, like, I don't know, the length of his thumb.
Right.
And then, through these winding, thoughtful tangents, he'd find himself deep in profound philosophical debates on morality, friendship, the limits of human knowledge. There was no rigid outline, no chase for a perfectly linear, polished argument. He just followed the path of his own thoughts wherever they led.
And that, for Montaigne, was precisely the point. It was part of his rebellion against the very structured, dogmatic academic writing of his time.
So the messiness was intentional.
In a way, yes. His philosophical underpinning for this approach was the idea that life itself, much like his essays, is not a perfectly polished TED Talk.
Good analogy.
It's not a linear, flawlessly executed performance with a neat takeaway message for an audience. No. Life is messy. It's fascinating. It's often unedited. It's a constantly evolving, sometimes contradictory, often imperfect draft.
Full of false starts and tangents.
Exactly. False starts, digressions, confusion, brilliant insights emerging from unexpected places. To try and force life, or ourselves within it, to conform to some ideal of flawless perfection is to fundamentally misunderstand and, frankly, resist its true nature. It becomes an act of self-tyranny.
So the relevance of this good enough rebellion is enormous then, especially for anyone prone to perfectionism, like our friend John at the start, agonizing over that draft.
Absolutely.
Or relinquishing that pervasive, often exhausting need for perfection in every single aspect of life, whether it's work, creativity, a hobby, even just a social interaction. It can be incredibly liberating.
Wow, so what does it foster?
Well, it fosters authenticity, right?
Yeah.
Because you're no longer constantly performing for some imaginary audience, no longer editing yourself into an ideal. It reduces that self-imposed pressure, allowing for a more natural, fluid approach.
Less friction.
Less friction. And paradoxically, it can actually foster greater creativity. When you're not terrified of making a mistake, when the internal critic isn't screaming at every little deviation, you're much more willing to experiment, to wander off the expected path, maybe discover something entirely new in the messiness of it all. Now, this isn't about being sloppy or careless. Let's be clear.
The important distinction, yes.
It's about choosing where to invest your precious energy and recognizing that good enough is often not just efficient, but actually optimal. It frees you to achieve genuine progress instead of getting stuck in paralysis.
That distinction is critical. Good enough is not sloppy. It's about an intelligent allocation of your mental energy. For instance, a surgeon preparing for an operation. They absolutely need to strive for perfection. There's no good enough there.
Obviously, high stakes.
Very high stakes. But an internal memo, a social media post, even a casual conversation. Striving for perfection in those areas often leads to paralysis or just wasted energy. The good enough rebellion is about discerning where perfection is truly required versus where it's become a self-imposed prison hindering progress, and importantly, joy.
It's about being effective and authentic.
Not flawless and exhausted,
Yeah.
exactly.
Now that we've explored these powerful ideas, the tombstone test, the opinion diet, the good enough rebellion, it's time to put them into action. Because we believe that true understanding, real transformation, comes from direct experience, not just thinking about these concepts.
Getting your hands dirty, so to speak.
Exactly. So we're inviting you, our listeners, to join us on what we're calling the Freedom Experiment. It's a structured, actionable 7-day challenge designed to help you put Montaigne's selective indifference into practice in your own life.
Okay, a 7-day challenge.
Yeah, and we're framing it as an experiment very deliberately to foster curiosity, reduce the pressure, encourage a spirit of playful exploration rather than rigid obligation.
Makes it less daunting.
Hopefully. Think of it as a low-stakes foray into the maybe slight discomfort of letting go, designed to reveal the surprising freedom that might be waiting on the other side.
Okay, so what's involved? Days 1 to 3, what's the focus?
Days 1 through 3 are all about conscious observation.
Okay.
This is about cultivating a heightened sense of self-awareness, becoming like a detective of your own anxieties. Notice when caring feels heavy. Pay close attention to those moments, the tightening chest, the surge of anxiety, the overwhelming obligation, that nagging internal judgment.
Pinpointing the triggers.
Exactly. Is it when you're drafting an email, like John, planning something social, trying to make every detail perfect, worrying about someone's fleeting opinion? Just notice, jot them down, even just mentally.
And then?
And then, importantly, reflect. Is this specific caring truly serving you? Is it leading to a positive outcome? Or is it just strangling you with unnecessary burdens, draining your energy, stealing your peace?
So it's about mapping your personal worry landscape first.
Precisely. Identifying the triggers and the real, often disproportionate impact they have on your well-being. making the unconscious conscious.
Okay, that makes sense for the first few days. What about days 4 and 5?
All right, days 4 and 5, we step into the active phase. This is where you practice what we're playfully calling delicious neglect.
Delicious neglect. I like it.
Yeah, the task is simple, but it might feel a little rebellious, maybe deceptively powerful. Deliberately leave one email unanswered for longer than you normally would, or perhaps skip a non-essential meeting you'd usually attend out of obligation.
Ooh, testing the boundaries.
Gently testing them.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not responding to a non-urgent text for a few hours, letting a minor chore go undone for an extra day. The underlying principle here is to directly experience the non-catastrophic consequences of these minor acts of non-compliance or non-perfection.
Challenging the world will end assumption.
Exactly. We often operate under that subconscious fear that if we don't respond instantly, if we miss something, if we aren't perfectly on top of everything, the world will indeed fall apart, or at least our reputation will crumble.
And this exercise is designed to prove, through direct experience,
That it doesn't.
that the world, in fact, does not fall apart.
Right.
That email probably doesn't cause a crisis. The skipped non-essential meeting often goes unnoticed or someone else handles it easily. The sky remains firmly in place.
Such a relief.
It is. You learn through lived experience that prioritizing your peace, your time, your energy over every single perceived obligation does not lead to disaster. Instead, it creates space.
You reclaim some agency.
You reclaim agency over your attention and energy. It teaches you your self-worth isn't tied to immediate responsiveness or perpetual availability. It shatters that illusion of indispensability we sometimes cling to. And often, honestly, others don't even notice or care nearly as much as we think they will.
Okay, so observation, then delicious neglect. What about the final stretch, days 6 and 7?
Right, days 6 and 7. Here we take it a step further into embracing intentional imperfection.
Doing something badly on purpose.
Essentially, yes. Deliberately do something badly on purpose. Something low stakes that might typically trigger your inner perfectionist or your fear of judgment.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, maybe you sing off-key when you're alone, even if you usually try hard to hit the notes and just revel in the slightly wonky sound. Or you send a text message with a blatant typo.
Ooh, the urge to correct.
Exactly. And you consciously resist that urge. Let it stand. Perhaps you wear 2 different socks, deliberately. Or leave a small, inconsequential smudge on a presentation slide you're working on internally. The goal here isn't to become sloppy or make mistakes that harm others.
Right, it's controlled imperfection.
It's controlled, low-stakes imperfection. The point is to revel in the experience of the sky not falling.
So it's about deconstructing the fear.
Precisely. Actively deconstructing the fear of failure or judgment by proactively engaging with imperfection in these safe scenarios. You discover firsthand that a typo-ridden text doesn't end a friendship. Singing off-key doesn't summon the judgment police. A minor smudge doesn't invalidate your entire effort.
Build resilience.
It builds profound resilience against the fear of criticism. It teaches you deep down that your value isn't dependent on flawless execution. It's a playful yet powerfully transformative way to challenge those rigid, self-imposed rules that often stifle our spontaneity, our creativity, and ultimately our joy.
Which is a direct challenge to that internal perfectionist.
The one that keeps so many of us in mental chains.
Yes. We've actually heard about some incredible breakthroughs from people trying this experiment. There's a wonderful anecdote about Priya in Birmingham.
Okay.
Priya belongs to a very active, quite intellectual book club. And she always felt this immense, almost paralyzing pressure to have read every single chapter, perfectly synthesized every argument, ready to contribute profound original insights.
Sounds stressful for a book club.
Right. It made reading feel like a chore, a burden. She'd sometimes rush through chapters just to avoid the perceived embarrassment of not being perfectly prepared. So one evening, after a particularly hectic week, she walked into her book club meeting, took a deep breath, and just admitted with a bit of vulnerability, you know what? I didn't finish the chapter this week.
Oh, brave move in that kind of group. What happened?
Well, the silence that followed was brief, maybe a bit palpable, but then something truly liberating happened. One by one, other members started chiming in.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, thank goodness. One exclaimed relief, just washing over her voice. I didn't either, but I was so afraid to say anything. Another confessed, I skimmed the last 50 pages, just couldn't get through them. Another said, I barely started it.
Wow, a cascade of honesty.
Totally. The result wasn't judgment, wasn't disapproval. It was this spontaneous wave of mutual relief, shared laughter, and actually a surprising deepening of their connection.
That's fantastic.
Priya's simple act of vulnerability, just letting go of that need for perfection, it didn't just free her. It freed others too, and fostered this deeper, more authentic connection within the group. It revealed that shared human experience of overwhelm, the universal struggle to keep up.
It's such a powerful illustration, isn't it? How often our fears of judgment are completely unfounded,
Right.
and how letting go of that perceived need for perfection can actually foster genuine connection, not break it down. It shows that when you embrace your own good enough, you often give permission for others to do the same.
And a beautiful space opens up.
A beautiful space for mutual understanding, empathy, and just relief. This entire journey, from conscious observation through delicious neglect to intentional imperfection, it really culminates in this profound understanding of how much freedom lies in strategically choosing what not to care about.
And how much richness is gained in return.
Which brings us to a beautiful, quite profound closing thought from Montaigne himself. His final words, apparently, as he approached the end of his life, were simply, "I'm shutting up shop."
I'm shutting up shop. Simple.
Just think about the profound simplicity and the deep sense of peace embedded in those words. Contrast that with what we so often hear as common modern regrets. It's rarely, "I wish I'd worked harder," is it?
No, or I should have impressed more people.
Or "I should have chased every last bit of perfection." More often, the regrets are about connection, about presence, experience, authenticity, about having truly lived. Montaigne's "I'm shutting up shop" isn't a sigh of resignation or a lament of things left undone. It feels like a statement of completion, of contentment, a quiet, powerful declaration of being done, being whole, being at peace with what he had done, and perhaps even more profoundly, what he had chosen not to do.
What he'd chosen not to care about.
Exactly.
It really speaks to a deep sense of peace, doesn't it? A feeling of having lived fully, authentically, without that crushing weight of external expectations or the endless futile pursuit of more.
There's a profound satisfaction in that.
Yeah, being complete in oneself, rather than constantly striving for some unattainable, externally defined ideal. It's such a powerful counter-narrative to our always-on, always-striving culture. So as you go forth from this deep dive, we have a small piece of homework for you, the listener. A single, actionable step toward your own liberation.
Just one thing.
Just one thing to start. Pick one thing, just one, to care less about this week. And here's the crucial caveat. The point of clarity Montaigne himself would absolutely insist upon.
Yeah.
We're not talking about your essential relationships, the people you love, your core values, your integrity.
Not the important stuff.
Absolutely not. Those things matter deeply. They deserve your full care, your unwavering attention. No, we're talking about the noise.
The noise.
The trivial anxieties, the imagined judgments, the unnecessary perfectionism, the external pressures that constantly tug at your attention and just deplete your precious energy. Pick one piece of that noise.
And as you consciously choose to reduce your investment in that noise, what should you look for?
Notice what happens. Observe how space maybe begins to open up in your mind. How that constant mental chatter starts to quiet down, almost like, a buzzing bee finally leaving the room.
Peace.
Yeah. Pay attention to how creativity might stir in those newly cleared mental channels. How new ideas might surface when you're not burdened by those old worries. Notice the surprising, perhaps paradoxical truth. The less you grasp for control over every minute detail, every single outcome,
the more life falls into place.
the more life naturally seems to fall into place, more fluidly, maybe less painfully. It's not about becoming indifferent to life itself, but about becoming more deeply present to your life, the one you actually want to live. Ultimately, Montaigne's wisdom really culminates in this deeply personal, timeless piece of advice, a guiding star, really, for navigating any era. He famously said, "The greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to yourself."
To belong to yourself. Powerful.
Isn't it? Just think about that for a moment. To belong to yourself, what does that truly mean for you in your life right now?
It implies a kind of self-possession.
Exactly. Being self-possessed, anchored firmly in your own values, your own intuition, your own peace, free from the constant imposition of external expectations and the crippling anxieties that often come with them. It's about finding your own internal compass, trusting your own judgment.
And living a life that is authentically yours.
Authentically, unreservedly yours. So ponder that. What would it mean for you to truly belong to yourself, unburdened by the things that ultimately don't matter? What freedom awaits you there on the other side of selective indifference? We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.